Hi, I'm Jesse Hirsh, and welcome to another episode of MetaViews, recorded live from the Academy of the Impossible, where it's a really foggy, muddy, rainy, snowy day, but Laura's joined us to talk about biology and media.
Yeah.
And, of course, Laura, as you know, whether we actually talk about the thing that I put on the title slide is maybe a 50-50 chance. The actual structure of our show ends up revolving around three pillars. In your case, I've chosen biology, AI, and politics, because I think the two of us can get into quite a bit of material and discussion.
Yeah.
But as you know, we do tend to start every episode of MetaViews with the news, partly because MetaViews publishes a daily newsletter, and today's issue is on the lies and false promises of neoliberalism. And MetaViews is kind of anti-ideological. We tend to... take issue with all ideologies. In today's issue, we've been picking a lot lately on the fascists and the conservatives, so we felt it was time to call on the hypocrisies of liberalism. With that aside, as you know, Laura, our goal of our news segment is to throw to our guest and say, is there anything that you've been paying attention to that you think our audience should know? This could be anything from personal news to industry news to world news, and in your case, even European news, since most of our listeners, unfortunately, tend not to be up to speed on what's happening across the pond, as we like to say here in North America. So with that said, welcome to MetaViews, Laura. Glad you could make it. What do you got for us today in terms of the news?
Yeah, in terms of the news, I was thinking a little bit about it. And I think when it comes to the news, what's on my mind right now is the EU military giant 800 billion budget. And I'm like, all my life, I've been anti-war. I was just like, why do we ever even have a military? Like, it's peace. War doesn't exist anymore. And in the last, I don't know, like 6, 7, 8 years, I've grown a little bit older. Like, I'm 29 now. I'm starting to understand that maybe having a military is a good thing after all. And yeah, I think this is a really, really good sign. I don't know, like with Trump, I usually don't really agree with Trump, but I have to say I do think the EU should be a little bit more proactive in their military spending, and I'm really happy to see that by being a really messy and crazy policymaker, that the rest of the world is like, uh-oh. We have to get our shit together real soon now, because things are changing. And
to your point, this is huge news, and the extent to which both Europe is rethinking its relationship to America. But let me ask you, still within this subject, a quasi technical question. Historically, and when I mean historically, really, I just mean the last few decades. European military spending, the modest amounts that there have, a lot of that's gone to America. Like, they're buying American weapons, they're buying American gear. Will this new commitment to defense spending in Europe, will it be focused on the creation of a European kind of, for lack of a better phrase, military-industrial complex? Like, will there be European technology and European industry that is the beneficiary of this spending? Do you have any sense of that?
I've been watching a little bit of news. Like, I'm not super familiar with the industry, but I like to keep up to date. And we have been very dependent on American suppliers, definitely. And what I'm hearing is that, especially when it comes to like France and Germany, like, they really have like the industry and the materials and even the people and that kind of stuff to really build their own stuff. However, for example, what I saw on the news was like we just don't have factories for example, artillery, or maybe very little, and it's just like, yeah, if we're gonna need them sooner, then like if we need them in 10 years, like that's okay, we can build those factories. But if we need them like in 2 years, that's not happening. So I was also seeing that definitely we're looking to spend some parts of that money on other partners. Like, I don't know where you get missiles. Like, I don't regularly go out to the grocery store buy some missiles, you know. But
Thankfully. Yeah.
yeah, but I'm sure there are, like, I don't know, producers I know South Korea is an important supplier. I know India is up and coming in all kinds of ways. Who knows what they're doing? I believe they were working on some military um, industrialization as well. Um, I don't know. I think it's for me personally, it's more about the fact that we are more connected as European countries, and more listening to each other, and more like the EU is actually like at the top, is really making, you know, decisions here. And that's something that's been criticized a lot about the EU, that they're very bureaucratic, very slow, and sometimes even incredibly inefficient. And yeah, I mean, I get that, but
This has kind of woken the bureaucracy out of its
yeah,
slumber because it has to
yeah,
start taking seriously the policy landscape. Well, let me ask you one final
actually true.
question here. You know, just out of my own ignorance, but at the same time suspicion.
Mm,
You know, the Netherlands has a reputation for high tech expertise.
yeah.
Certainly in the case of ASML, right, which is
Yeah, that I live very close to that.
right
Yeah,
on, right on, a global leader. To what
yeah.
extent do you think that intellectual capacity, that engineering capacity, could be repurposed towards defense technologies? Or to your point, is it more something that is distributed throughout Europe and then sourced potentially from elsewhere in the world?
Well, that's something I know a little bit more about when it comes to like the chip industry. Like I'm not in the chip industry, but I studied like sort of electrical engineering, computer science mix. And I have lots of friends in the industry and stuff like that. And I read some books. And um, the issue here is that, first of all, ASML, they produce chips. Well, they produce machines that build the chips. And there are only a few companies that make those machines, and ASML provides the machines that do like 90%, if not more, of all the high-tech chips, like NVIDIA, Apple, AMD, Intel a little bit less, but also Intel. Um, I don't know, some other like Qualcomm, like they are entirely dependent on ASML, like 100% dependent. And then you have a business like Zeiss, which is in Germany, which supplies the lenses for the super complicated lasers inside of the machines and stuff like that. And then you have TSMC in Taiwan, who actually puts these machines into use. You know, like they have the factories where these chips are produced. And at the same time, ASML is also very dependent on like intellectual property from America. So if you take a look at like what's actually happening, you have some centers that are incredibly important with some incredibly deep technical expertise. And there's one here in Eindhoven, in the Brainport region, as it's called. You have one in TSMC in Taiwan. You have Silicon Valley, and you have the northern part of Germany, and those are just entirely dependent on one another, completely dependent. Like it doesn't work. You can't
Although
you can't stop it.
Although I would argue the loose part of that connection, that matrix of centers, is the intellectual property piece, because you could always disregard intellectual property and just use some of the stuff you've got there already, as geopolitically controversial as it would. Because here you have, on the one hand, Trump scaring Europe by saying, hey, look, you're on your own. And of course, Putin is scaring Europe because he's saying, well, given the opportunity, I don't know where my military would stop advancing. And if I was a diabolical dictator, I'd certainly have my eyes on ASML as a key
Oh yeah.
piece of,
Oh yeah.
to your point, the not just economic engine of our globalized world, but you need these chips in every form of armament, every form of military technology. So while the interdependence is there, I still think the intellectual property side could get cut out if need be. But your point about northern Germany is also quite valid, and perhaps that unites Europe to defend itself. Any final thoughts before we move on to our next segment?
Well, I'd like to say, like, just a little bit to add a little bit more nuance. ASML provides the machines for the highest end of the chips, not necessarily for all the chips. Lots of military chips are actually based on older process nodes and older technologies. And those aren't necessarily produced by the machines that ASML builds. ASML provides mostly the machines that provide that power the highest end of computational stuff, and that's mostly just the computers that we use in daily life, like laptops and the big brands like the Apple, the Nvidia, Intel, AMD, that kind of stuff, Qualcomm. But not far less the military stuff. But I mean, maybe that's a topic we can switch to, but AI is definitely a thing that's probably going to have a huge impact the coming years. Like, it's already doing things, but
and we will get into AI, but let us shift now into our second segment, which we call WTF, or What's the Future? And this is where we ask our guests, same way that we asked you, but what's the news that you kind of got your eyes on these days? When you look at the event horizon, what captures your attention? What do you think our audience should be looking at?
I mean, I remember a quote. I think it's probably attributed to like Bill Gates or something, but it's that the world changes very little in like 5 years and changes way much than you can imagine in 20 years. And that's always the case. Like, it always takes about 20 years for a huge shift to happen in technology, media, and the landscape of everything, basically. And I don't think the short term is something I'm really interested in, because the short term is just like, oh, AI is going to do things, but nobody actually knows what the hell it's going to do. Call me a pessimist. I mean, it's useful, definitely, but a lot of it is just peddling, like, hey, AI is going to be the future, and then you ask them, like, what does it do? It's like, AI, it's AI. And I don't care. Like, if you ask me about what's actually exciting me about the future, and that's the 20-year horizon, it's something completely different. And that's, I don't know if you've heard of it, but dynamic land. It's it's super, super interesting. Like, what they're doing is basically reimagining how computers work from a very fundamental level, and not at like, you have to imagine there was a person who in 1950, 1960 first imagined the idea that we would be sitting on an office chair looking at a screen. That was a choice, right? And now we have smartphones, we have laptops, we have computers, desktop computers, we have all kinds of other stuff, we have some virtual reality. But those visions are very boring. Like, it's just the everyday stuff. And what they're doing at Dynamic Land is they're imagining communal computing, which is basically like, what if everything is a computer? And that sounds very dystopian, maybe, because if you say that to me, I would be like, what the fuck? Please get out of here. But what they're actually practically imagining is, what if a piece of paper is actually like, I mean, Harry Potter maybe is a good example. Like they have these magic moving images, right? What if computers were just pieces of paper that you put on the table? And what if you roll some dice, and you're playing a game, then the table moves with you, and you can have conversations about, like, I don't know, politics or whatever, instead of like just talking to one another, which is, like, this is, you also mentioned McLuhan in the newsletter. This is a conversation, like we talk, um, but their conversations are mediated with live computational objects. So if you have a conversation about, like, hey, I think this or that policy is a bad idea, you can actually hold the policy and be like, hey, this is the policy, these are the numbers, and these are the maps, and these are the laws, and you have that on the table, or you have that on the wall, or you have that in the bookcase. And
Or even to your
it's
point, you say Marshall
it's
McLuhan, and then
oh yeah,
his image appears, and then you instantly pull out a quote from one of his writings,
yeah,
his books, and it's
yeah,
on the table, so we can look at the quote and talk about what it means. No, I think what you're describing is a level of ubiquity, of computational ubiquity,
yes,
and a shared, a collective user interface to that, which I
yes.
agree could be dystopian, but also sounds quite appealing.
Yeah, it's a completely different. I mean, it's not necessarily dystopian in how they imagine it. Like Dynamic Land really imagines it as like communal spaces. So think of like R&D labs, perhaps some a room or two in a school or a library, those kind of things, right? And for that, I think it's amazing. And also, like, I don't know, I'm sure it's going to happen. Like even Nintendo will probably be getting into this kind of stuff. They already are, like
And
the XR or AR stuff, where you have a game that's extended,
yeah,
but not by
and
glasses or stuff.
And the only place I'd push back on that is there's no way that this would be limited to just one room. I think
No,
the double edged sword of this is it will be ubiquitous whether people want it to be or not.
yeah, it's
And
probably going to be dystopian anyway.
well, but May it doesn't have to be dystopian. But I think the one example that in because like when you said earlier, you were like I agree with you. It gets a little cliche when people are like AI is the future. And I remember 10, 20 years ago, everyone was like, mobile is the future.
It is.
But the thing I didn't like about that was mobile is not the future, it's the present. AI is
Wow.
not the future, it's the present. What
Yeah.
you're describing does sound like the future.
Yeah.
And based on the present and how people use smartphones in the present, I can guarantee that the bathroom, every surface in the bathroom, is going to have this capability, either because people want to get ready in the mirror and do so with their social media friends, or while they're sitting on the toilet, they want to look at TikToks or look at Instagram. I'm not judging. I'm just saying on an anthropological level, this is already what's happening now. And I will use that as an opportunity to segue into our feature conversation, partly because you've already brought up AI and you've already brought up McLuhan.
Yeah.
Two
Do it.
things I definitely wanted to discuss because you and I initially made a connection over a shared appreciation of Marshall McLuhan and
Hmm.
kind of the approach of understanding things as media. But you took it even further in a way that I thought was really quite brilliant, which was to add the element of biology. That on the
Mm.
one hand, Marshall McLuhan looks at media in a way that previous to him, very few did. But
Yeah.
I think you've successfully connected that to not just looking at everything as a form of media, where the medium is the message, where the system is far more important than the content itself.
Hmm.
But you've connected this to a larger appreciation and understanding of biology that I'd love for you to try to unpack in a way that our audience, who may or may not know about Marshall McLuhan,
Yeah.
and I certainly have more of an intuitive understanding of biology rather than a scholarly one.
Yeah,
So
I'm not an
you're,
academic, just to be clear.
yes, nor am I. But
Yeah.
I think that what you're getting at here, I think, is really brilliant. So maybe if you could start us off by trying to get us as both high level as you can, but giving the
Mhm.
old explain it to me like I'm five.
Yeah. No, I've been. This is something I'm really interested in. Like over the course of, I will just give a short introduction before I even answer the question. Like over the course of my life, I've always been really interested in biology, and biology to me, maybe I'm just like a biologist kind of person or something, but makes the most sense as like the framework through which to see the world, the natural world, like even more than religion, even more than, I would even say, science, although science is definitely an important part of biology.
I mean,
Because
biology is kind of a subset of science. It's more
yeah,
focused.
yeah, it's about life and nature and ecology and that kind of stuff and sustainability. And but what McLuhan is all about is, and this is a bit difficult to understand about McLuhan because media is a word. If you hear the word media, then you think about like the news, newspapers, like I don't know, the stuff you talk about at work when you're at lunch, TikTok, that kind of stuff. But what
The most,
McLuhan means, yeah, that's what
I was
most
going to
people
say the
know.
most obvious forms of media, but go
Yeah,
on, please.
yeah. What McLuhan says is basically media is anything that extends man and man as humanity, people, right? So media is clothing. Media is indeed the television. Media is also this chair that I'm sitting on. Media is most certainly the headphones that I'm wearing. Media is even more certainly these glasses, Like, I don't know, if you were young, sorry, I will, try to,
You're doing great. No,
oh,
keep it up.
yeah, no, I want to go in two directions at once, which doesn't work. Keep
Well, you
focused.
can. You just may lose us, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, but if I try to explain it, extensions of man basically means people have a way of being in the world. Like we have hands, we have our eyes, we can look at things, we can grab things, like I have a mouse, that kind of stuff. But a lot of this when like you go 10,000 years ago, we used it to like grab an apple from a tree, or we go hunt a fish with a stick, right? And that's what McLuhan basically makes a difference between the stick is an extension of our body. So normally we have our arm, but with a stick, our arm is longer. And not only is our arm longer, our arm is now pointy. If I punch you, then I can hurt you. But if I pierce you, that will hurt a lot more. And so we can use that for hunting. And McLuhan basically sees media more as, I think, in a conventional sense, more people would understand McLuhan's understanding of media as tools, but it's more comprehensive than that because it's not just, like the hammer and the saw. It's everything that extends our basic capacity. So our capacity to connect, to communicate, to eat, to concentrate, to get distracted, to have wars, to, anything that people do. And McLuhan's main theory is basically the things that we make decide how we live. And if we want to connect that to,
Well, I was going to say, I think the way you've done a fantastic job, by the way, of
yeah,
describing McLuhan. And ironically, people have spent decades trying to understand McLuhan and failing. And you've presented it, I think, in a very accessible way. So bravo. But what
thanks.
I found interesting about the way you described it is it inherently evokes biology. It
Mhm.
inherently evokes a kind of relationship between organisms that is constantly connecting and interchanging information. I'm kind of getting ahead of you, but this is me both complimenting you and sort of saying, you got me, I'm following along. Explain how you made the connection to biology.
I'm not sure. Like, I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but I think it was about like AI or something. And
And
there's
feel
this.
free to use AI as an example because
Yeah, I think
AI is the media of our moment. And I think people make a
yeah.
mistake in not seeing AI as media, right? They
Oh
see
yeah,
AI as technology. They see AI as tool. They see
yeah,
AI as marketing product. But very few look at AI as media. So maybe you could use that as a tangible
yeah,
example.
yeah. No, that was the example that we talked about as well. Like there's this narrative that AI is here to like replace people or replace workers or that kind of stuff. And to an extent, of course, it will. Like definitely. Especially if you look at like lower ends of copywriting and just translation jobs that are like simpler, and that kind of stuff is already disappearing, and some office work is already changing a little bit, and no, that's happening. But there are some people and they're just like, hey, AI singularity, it's going to explode and then everything is going to be AI. And I'm just like, or the AI that optimizes for paper clips and stuff like that. And I'm just like, these theories about like AI creating self-replicating, hyper-intelligent nanobots that communicate with high efficiency, that sounds to me like viruses. You know, I mean,
To
you're
your point,
basically
biological metaphors are kind of unquestioningly and uncritically part of the AI hype cycle, but no one's
yeah,
actually questioning whether those biological metaphors make sense.
yeah, and some of them make sense. Like AI is definitely artificial intelligence to an extent. Like it's artificial and it is definitely intelligent to an extent. And we can philosophize all day about what intelligence is and all that kind of stuff. But no, it can think, it can respond, it has some kind of intelligence. And to me, I think many people, when they hear AI, they have no idea what it means. They have no idea what it is. It's just computers. It's literally just computers doing their thing, but faster. It's just computers doing their thing. Nothing really has changed other than um, yeah, traditionally we tell the computer what to do by writing in instructions, and here we tell the computer what to do by giving examples. That's the entire paradigm change of AI, and that's made possible because every so many years computers get faster, and that's cool. Um, but what really I'm not really trying to give any answers. I'm not saying like the singularity is not going to happen or that kind of stuff. I mean, I think
I
it's
don't mind saying that,
bullshit. I
but
think it's bullshit, but
yeah,
it's not entirely impossible.
sure. It's also possible that pigs will evolve to fly, but probably not within the next 20 years. It might take
Yeah,
20,000 for that to happen. And
yeah, that kind of stuff.
that's where I also find the frame of biology powerful and critical when it comes to the way in which we evaluate not just media but technology as well, because you mentioned something I thought was interesting, that when we talk about things like singularity, when we talk about the impact of AI, there is inherently a philosophical debate, a philosophical frame that underpins it. That
Mhm.
philosophy might be ethics, that philosophy might be what is possible, that philosophy might be whether the culture is open to it. But you're adding an additional lens that I think is really interesting, which is, does this meet the principles of biology? Right? Like
Yeah,
biology suggests that, you, for example, need biodiversity to have health and positive evolution
yeah.
rather than the monoculture that is contemporary artificial intelligence. Like if
Hmm.
we had, instead of 3, 4, 5 companies who are developing versions of AI, I'm like, that's not really enough biodiversity to launch the singularity. But if we had 100,000, like so many different companies developing this and doing different attempts and different experiments, that would make me think, okay, we're getting close to something.
I, I, I
So,
I find that really fascinating because I think it's like the exact opposite. Like the singularity to me sounds like some kind of dystopian nightmare.
oh, absolutely.
Because if
And go ahead.
Yeah, so like the example, and I believe there was a Nobel Prize winner, like a Turing Award winner or something, recently gave a presentation about this, and it was just like AI in its current state totally has the potential to completely destroy human life as we know it, and that's
Jeff
not a
Hinton.
yeah. I think that might have been Jeffrey Hinton, right? And I think that's totally reasonable because just like we can use chemistry and we can use modern industrial engineering practices to make some kind of metals or some kind of whatever weird thermopolymers or what thermomers I think they're called, those things are indestructible and they cannot be consumed and metabolized by normal nature yet. I mean, hey,
Yes, yes.
yet. In terms of millions of years, maybe, but like we can invent a form of life or a form of thing that sustains itself. We can totally do that in like 20, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Make
But
factories that build robots that replace humans. But
but the question,
why?
yes, exactly, right? The question is why?
Why?
Because to go to something you earlier said, and this is why I keep coming back to why I think biology is an excellent critical lens for this world. We can create life today. We
Yes.
can create biological life, we can create synthetic life, and we can create arguably quote unquote artificial life. Although, to your point about philosophy, I think that word artificial is a little contentious. But what we can't do in all of those situations, and if you disagree with me, I would love to hear a different
Mm.
perspective. We can't control life.
No,
That
I
we can
100%
create
agree.
life, we can't control it. And that's where, to me, the whole AI language falls apart.
Yes.
That it assumes control. And I still think that biology teaches us that control is an illusion. Thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. That's my whole, I think that's the whole point that I'm trying to make or trying to illuminate with these metaphors that I make with biology and stuff. It's just like we can make these things and it will absolutely destroy humanity if we do that. We can totally make these killer robots and they will get out of hand. And I mean, if we make war machines that find people based on facial recognition and they replicate themselves, we will just make some kind of, like Jeffrey Hinton says, some kind of sociopath indestructible army. Like, okay,
Yeah.
great, fun, but um again, like, why?
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing and what I'm really grateful for is just that's not necessarily what's happening, because people know AI and people do stuff with AI, and there are many companies and there are like open spaces and younger people are experimenting with it. And what you're going to be seeing, and you can also see this kind of stuff on LinkedIn, for example, a group of students, they were playing, or maybe it was a business, I'm not sure, but it was a video about some kind of an AI used to control bomb machines or whatever. And they were just like, if you talk to this bomb robot thing in a certain philosophical loophole, it will just destroy everything. And it's so stupid because I can imagine a future where you're invaded by these hyper intelligent robots and all these promises about like a prosperous future and whatever. And then you just have children who are like citing Kantian ethics or like Nietzschean quotes or whatever to the AI, and the AI has an existential crisis and it breaks down or something.
I mean,
Like,
that's
it's
fantastic, right? Poet hackers as the
yeah, no, but
pacifist resistance.
yeah, no, but that's actually a thing. Like poet hackers is a really good term for that.
Yeah.
That's definitely going to be a thing because these things aren't indestructible. And what you're what really gives me, I mean, it's kind of scary at the same time, but something that's really giving me hope is, like, for example, the mushrooms in Chernobyl, these radiotrophic mushrooms, they eat radioactivity. They just like
Yeah.
They were just like, "Hey, fuck you!
Yeah. Yeah.
This place is awful. So this is mine now."
Yeah.
And
It's
then you
kind of
also
evolution in action.
yeah, and then you also have this stuff like an article that I read about the port of Antwerp. There were all these huge metal boats, and at some point they found there was a new kind of rust or some kind of deterioration, and they found metal eating bacteria.
Oh
And I'm
no.
just like, what the hell? That's a real problem. And I can
I
guarantee
mean,
you,
it's
like
not a problem
50.
for the bacteria.
No, no, of course not. But these things are happening, and I can give many more examples, like Ideonella sacchayensis, this plastic eating bacteria that's been found, and now also some mealworms have that in them, and you can like metabolize some softer plastics with that already in waste. That stuff is going to keep happening. You can't stop
Yeah.
evolution. Evolution,
Yeah.
I really think, is like a fundamental force, and yeah, I don't have much more to say about that. Like
It's
there.
phenomenal, but I want to shift slightly because, although
Yeah.
maybe not slightly, there was, I'm not sure if it was Wittgenstein, but there was a theorist who you were
Hmm.
kind of connecting to what we're describing today in terms of your thoughts around biology and media. Can you remind me who that was and give us a
Yeah,
kind of
definitely.
primer the way you did with
Wittgenstein.
McLuhan?
Yeah, Wittgenstein. Yeah, Wittgenstein is my favorite philosopher by far. Wittgenstein is basically, well, he's a crazy person, that's for sure. Like his life is really interesting. Like he's a guy was born in Vienna to an extremely rich family, like some steel magnate or something, in like late 1800s. Went to the same school as Hitler, which is always a fun fact. They probably didn't know each other, but
I was going to
um,
say, hopefully he beat him up in the schoolyard, but it was all
there, were,
Wittgenstein's fault.
there were a few years difference between them. They probably never really met or whatever. Maybe they saw each
Fair
other.
enough.
Yeah, but Wittgenstein is a super interesting philosopher because he's basically, and it's kind of what I'm doing here is just he dismantles bullshit, and in a way that's really accessible, because he was just like, philosophers are basically a lot of the time doing things with language that don't make sense. And that's not to say that philosophy is something that doesn't work. Like a lot of philosophy is very, very pragmatic, very useful, very life enriching, perhaps, or all that kind of stuff. But Wittgenstein was really more about like the kind of philosophy that I, as an angsty teen, engaged with. Like I'm reading something and I'm just like, oh, AI is going to take over the world because of singularity, and it's like, no, that's just corporations trying to sell you fear, sell you the antidote to fear that they created, and yeah, Wittgenstein is sort of just like gives you the tools to dismantle bullshit in very, very approachable way, because he's just like, hey, if you have something to say, then say it. Like
Yes,
that's very
yes.
radical. That's very radical. If in I mean, this is not necessarily contemporary, but there's so much bullshit. Like imagine, for example, think back to the blockchain era. Like this is going to change the world. And it's like,
I
how?
I wish I could agree with you that it was past tense. I think that era is still upon us,
Oh
unfortunately.
yeah, but it's not as bad as it was like a few years ago. It's it's
I
it's it's changed.
I agree it's changed, but it's having a resurgence in America that is, to
Oh,
your
fair enough.
point, based on delusion. But yes, that's another excellent example. How, I mean, where did you see the connection between Wittgenstein and biology? Or am I
Um,
projecting and that was just
no,
you kind
no,
of connecting different ideas that you were
no.
playing with?
Wittgenstein basically his most. This is how I personally see what Wittgenstein does. Is he's a language philosopher
Hmm.
first and foremost, and what he does is basically he says, "Hey, we should study language um, as it appears in the real world. Like if you look at some construction workers, and they're saying, hey, give me a plank, and you see someone walking up and giving them a plank or whatever, then that's language. Language has a purpose. It's situated in the world and with people doing things. And what academics are doing is, and what earlier Wittgenstein, because he used to be like this very academically mathematical, logical focused person, is trying to force a sort of mathematics into language, which doesn't work. And that's primarily the kind of thing that Wittgenstein was against. And what Wittgenstein later developed is this methodology, which basically says just observe language as it happens. And that's what language is. And if you want to know what meaning is, then look at how people use the words. Like, meaning is use. And that's it. That's basically Wittgenstein's philosophy. And there's a lot of things that, like, he has a lot of thoughts about this, lots of questions, and lots of interesting stuff. But it's just like looking at language the way a biologist looks at animals or forests or ecosystems.
Because it really does evoke the phrase language is a virus, that it's constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. You can't come up with mathematical rules for it. You have to watch it. You have to observe it because it changes based on conditions, right? A plank on a construction site is one thing. A plank in a workout gym, in an exercise course is completely different, right? And that's a really a fascinating connection.
Yeah, and I have some ideas about this that, like I said, I'm not an academic, but I do want to be one.
No, quite the opposite. I think I think an important distinction to note, especially here for us at MetaViews, but I think also within your own intellectual journey, is there's a difference between an academic and an intellectual. And I always believe that academia is where intellectuals go to die. It's where they go to atrophy. It's where they go to stop thinking and start institutionalizing. And that may be different in Europe, where academia has a more nuanced culture.
Yeah, I don't know.
But here in North America, again, academia is where ideas go to die. It's where they go to, basically become irrelevant and boring, which is why Silicon Valley is so powerful, right? Because Silicon Valley is where ideas go to become companies. And I'm not saying that is better. I'm just saying it explains why we have such a disconnect here in terms of academics kind of, being anti-intellectual, as a paradoxic or oxymoronic as that might be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know enough about American academia culture and European academia culture. Like, I have some friends, like a good friend of mine, he was studying physics here at the University of Eindhoven of Technological University of Eindhoven. Okay, yeah. And he completely burned out because it's bullshit.
Yes.
Even though he's just there because he really loves it and physics is something he really is interested in and stuff like that. But at the same time, if I look at spaces like MIT Media Labs, if I look at Caltech, if I look at like, for example, I'm going to go visit Wageningen University this week, or if ETH Zurich, for example, there's also a technology university. Like, some really fucking interesting stuff is happening there. Or like
for sure.
Like, that's super cool. Or that university in China, that drone university with JDI, that's super cool.
But I would argue that you can access all their knowledge, access all the cool things they do, without having to pay them money and without having to subject yourself to the burnout. Now, if they want to pay you money, totally cool. And there are many institutions that will pay, especially graduate researchers, money to attend because they will benefit from your brilliance. And you are, Laura, absolutely brilliant. But it is, to your friend's point, they are fundamentally about training people to forget about work-life balance, to
Oh
commit
yeah.
themselves entirely to work. And biologically, that's stupid. It's just not
Yeah.
worth it. It just burns you out. It does not leave you productive. I am of a belief that in order for our brains to be their most productive, our bodies need to be healthy and
Yeah,
happy and
definitely.
and and doing good things. And that's where academia still is a industrial factory mindset that
Yeah.
tries to unfortunately burn people out. I am very biased in that regard, as
Yeah, I
regular
mean,
MetaViews listeners would know. But go
yeah,
ahead.
I mean, I'm not sure if that's necessarily true for all universities because, and maybe it's something that's also a little bit more a symptom of our time more than just um, something that's part of academia. Because in the Netherlands, for instance, I don't know how, I think it's also a problem in America, but in the Netherlands, for instance, we have what some people may call an epidemic of burnout in the working industry. And that has nothing to do with academia. And in academia, I think it's the same. I think it's just, does it? Yeah. Oh, I think, yeah, that would be an epidemic, right? Because a pandemic is global. But no, but yeah, it is global. It is global. It is global. Yeah, no, but I think where a big difference comes from, in my perspective, is that um, I went to like it's not a Montessori elementary school, but it's something like that. It was called Jena Plan. I don't know if that's something that exists outside of the Netherlands, but
Well,
it's
and I will
basically
quickly
Montessori.
say, I think most of our listeners probably don't even know what Montessori is. I happen to know what Montessori
Oh, I
is.
thought that was pretty
It
more.
was. It was. It no
Oh,
longer is. I was born in the early 70s,
mm-hmm,
and Montessori was around in maybe the 80s. I don't know. I don't think it made it to the 90s here in North America. But
mm-hmm.
it is a radical approach to early childhood education.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, it has kind of been pushed out by the conservatives who have here in North America really attacked education as we know it. But please continue.
yeah. So I went to. I wouldn't even call it an alternative school. Like they are pretty normal here in the Netherlands, and not in the sense that like the most schools are like that, but they're common. Like 1 in 3 schools maybe are like that. I don't quote me on that at all. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but in my experience, it's a pretty normal school to go to. And the idea is basically just like, as a child, don't give them homework. Just like talk to a child. Just like give them, I don't know, something to do. Like we had, for example, competitions about making airplanes, and it wasn't, paper airplanes, and it wasn't about. It was just something that the teacher came up with at some week, and it was just like, hey, you guys want to go make some airplanes? And we made paper airplanes, and we held competitions, and then the next week we held more competitions, and you learn so much from that because you learn origami, and you learn planning, and you learn some engineering skills, and you learn some drawing skills, you learn collaboration, and we have tests, but not that many. And if you want to do homework, then go ahead. Like ask the teacher, or maybe the teacher will be like, "Hey, do you want something to do at home? Like here's a cool book that you can read on mathematics." Or and some other child is like, "Hey, that kid, not the smartest. Well, that's fine. I mean, we can teach you like some what practical skills. Like for example, my father, he's construction worker. And as a very young child, I was taught at school how to saw wood. You know, that's the kind of stuff that they did there. And yeah, and we also had some tests, just like regular schools. And we also have just normal homework, not homework, but just regular lessons and all that kind of stuff. But it's just a little bit more free and more focused on the individual, but and also really focused on group work and just on developing people as people, like how people live, like
Hmm. So
in
that's the
regular life.
that's the polar opposite of North American education, where
Yeah, it's also
even
the polar
even
opposite
our
of many schools here in the Netherlands. It's
yeah,
not the average school.
I even our alternative schools are not as alternative as that. Which is why you do kind of get this mentality that education exists just to train people for the workforce rather than to
Yeah.
allow us to grow as human beings. Now, we are almost out of time. And really, what I would love to do with our kind of remaining few minutes is
Mhm.
try to get you to connect your thoughts around media, around biology, around language, around technology, and
Mhm.
apply them to politics. Because on the one hand, it's easy for us to look at contemporary politics and be like, oh, it's kind of ridiculous, it's kind of silly. But to your point about the 20-year window,
Mhm.
if you let's fast forward, you've picked up your PhD,
Oh
you've
God.
spent time thinking about all this stuff.
Yeah.
Indulge me in a kind of scenario, in a kind of speculation on if we were to better understand biology as a frame for
Mhm.
understanding media, for understanding politics, for understanding technology, how could
Yeah.
we apply that to a better political system?
Personally, I have been thinking a lot about this, and I'm very afraid that not much will change. Like, I think we can have pockets of change, pockets of optimism, pockets of, but like, take a look at history, for example. There is no period in history, take any period, any slice of 50 years in which there were no wars. I don't think that has anything to do with science or biology or our understanding. I think it's something relatively fundamental to human beings that we um, we fight, for example, and we make changes and we are different. And I think we can better understand it, and we can maybe change our own biology. If in that sense, I think we might be able to do some things. And sometimes when I dream of like a biology of language, when we really understand that language is proper alive, like viruses, and we have like a proper taxonomy and all that kind of stuff, maybe we can make vaccines, against certain pathogenic forms of language and that kind of stuff. And just like how prior to the invention of the discovery of penicillin, for example, we didn't really know how to treat severe bacterial infections. Maybe we can treat severe fascist infections with like, vaccines or medicine in language and
Right on.
scientifically. And that's super interesting. But at the same time, this is a point that Dawkins made. Richard Dawkins, like I've been reading his book, the famous, I don't even know what it's called, but what's his
Anyway,
book
go on.
called?
You've
Yeah,
been
it's
entertaining his ideas.
yeah. Well, what he basically showed is there's like 12 um, species on Earth that make warfare. 10 of them are ants, one is termites, and one is humans. And that has everything to do with the selfish gene. That's the book, and it has everything to do with how genes work and how sociology emerges from biology. And like I said, we can make pockets of change. We can collaborate in for good. We can collaborate for bad and that kind of stuff. Yes, but as long as we don't fundamentally alter our species to be different than our eusocial or whatever that framework is called, I believe it's eusocial um, species. I don't think anything is going to fundamentally change because imagine, hey, we make the science and we understand the language. There will be people who will be seeing that as control. And because it's a different language, like the Chinese or something, and then we're making this in Europe and we're using it to better China or whatever. Well, their culture is being erased, and and then
So
they'll be
let
like,
me
"Hey, you're fucking us over, and you get wars anyway." So,
let me entertain this kind of worldview that you've offered, because I think it has a lot of really interesting ingredients, and I'll offer this by first sharing a hypothesis I have, and
mhm.
then using the framework you've just offered me. I will then offer a response to this hypothesis I have, and then I'll get your reaction to sort of see if Professor, I'm applying this appropriately. So I have this very strong hypothesis. It's not just my own. There's a lot of
Okay.
science and other researchers backing it. That
Mhm.
one of the reasons we are witnessing the rise of fascism, and in particular, the strain of fascism we see, which is fueled by stupidity, right? And in particular, American stupidity, but global stupidity. And
Mhm.
I'm being facetious when I say this, but COVID has attacked our brains. And COVID has attacked our brains, and long COVID especially, to the extent that it has literally reduced our cognitive ability and connected that to an emotional dysregulation that makes
Mhm.
us a little bit more belligerent, a little bit more gullible, a little bit more likely to act in a way that is antisocial and is kind of dumb. And so I think, to get to my point of the solution, I've seen a lot of really interesting research around the treatment of long COVID and the treatment of PTSD, post traumatic
Mhm.
stress disorder, with
Mhm.
psilocybin. That
Oh
I
yeah.
think that if we started using psilocybin and other psychedelics to treat our current psychology and biology, that could enable a change in our evolutionary approach that was
Oh
more
yeah.
compassionate, more connected, and less combative and less divisive. Thoughts?
Um. eh, Yes. I mean, um, that might have some effects. Like I know
I
a
mean,
little
to
bit about the
Wittgenstein's
research.
point, we won't know until we try and observe. But
Yeah,
you were
yeah, no, but
saying,
let's say we do that on a global scale, and like there was a project to eradicate, I believe it was polio or something with vaccines, and we basically did it, I believe.
for a
Maybe it was a
while.
different. Yeah, no, no, that's measles. That's
No,
relevant.
polio is also unfortunately coming back. That's how fucked up
Oh,
we are right now.
yeah, I'm not super well versed in this, but I believe there was like something that we actually eradicated. Maybe it is polio that I'm talking about, but
Yeah, I mean,
and
it's to your point
and
about the metal eating bacteria, right?
yeah, no, but
Eradication only works if you maintain the environment in which it happened. We've
yeah,
allowed polio to come back because of the vaccine bullshit. I digress. Go ahead.
yeah, and let's say we solve the PTSD and all that kind of stuff, and everybody is like lovey-dovey, and people are working together, and it's chill, and then a meteorite comes at our Earth, and like, where are the crazy authoritarian people that we need at that point? Because I would rather have like these crazy Chinese authoritarian regimes who can like militarize their entire country and just operationalize, click a button, and the entire country is just like, hey, we need to solve this problem yesterday.
But
Because, for example, their COVID response was way faster than the rest of the world, and it was way too much, but it was faster and way more
but
efficient.
you just contradicted yourself, i.e., setting up my counter argument.
Mm-hmm.
Authoritarianism doesn't actually achieve that. That's a myth, right?
Doesn't it?
Authoritarianism, yeah, if you actually get into the history and empiricism of the people who've studied authoritarianism, it's a story of dysfunction,
No,
right?
but I thought that like,
No, but let me finish this.
yeah, sorry, yeah.
Authoritarians love to present themselves as efficient. They
Mm-hmm.
love to present themselves as capable of mobilizing resources in the face of a crisis. And historically, they cannot.
Oh, I didn't
Properly
know that.
empowered societies, and this is where I say as an aside, we have lived in most of our democratic societies are not very democratic, and they don't actually empower people, and they don't actually create what the environment I'm describing.
Mm-hmm.
But culture is what motivates people.
Yeah.
And culture is far more powerful than authoritarianism, and culture is
Hmm.
driven by stories. So for example, I live in a culture in which everyone used to smoke cigarettes. And the reason that everyone stopped smoking cigarettes is not because of laws, it's not because of authoritarianism, it's because they started losing loved ones to cancer. And then people created stories that said smoking cigarettes leads to cancer. So
Mm.
this is where I agree with you that if we are to respond to something like a meteor, we need a rapid response capability. And
Yeah.
I'm saying authoritarianism will never deliver it. Because to your example of COVID in China, while
Yeah,
China
I
was
thought it was an
able,
example.
but no, China was not actually successful in fighting COVID. They were successful in covering up COVID. They were
Mm.
successful in getting everyone to do stuff because of COVID. But they didn't actually follow the science nimbly enough because they leaned too far into authoritarianism that COVID is still there. COVID still exists in China. COVID still exists here. We are still fighting COVID
Yeah.
because the authoritarianism was not successful. And that's where I say you are right in desiring what you desire, which is a rapid, coordinated response. And I would
Mm.
argue that the internet has a better model of coordination for that. And authoritarianism is just a lie because it lies to us that it can offer this kind of security. But instead, there's, to your point, too many opposition, too many dissidents, too many
Mhm.
people defying it for it to ever work. I digress. Any final words before we segue to our shout out section?
Um, yeah, no, I think I agree with you. Like, my point was more about like authoritarianism can act faster, but you do make a good point that they don't necessarily um,
Achieve anything.
achieve more with that.
Yeah, this is the hare and the tortoise. The hare can go faster, but if the tortoise gets there in the end, then that is
Yeah.
the winner. And
But
this is where, we come to the shout out section of every MetaViews. Partly because, what I really love about talking to you, Laura, is you do sort of respect the idea that there is a world of ideas beyond ourselves, that there is a world of research and intellectual. So if there was someone that you wanted our audience to learn more about, that you want to shout out, and it doesn't have to be anyone we've mentioned today, because you have, of course, shouted out Marshall McLuhan and
mhm.
Wittgenstein. Who do you think our audience should know more about or should check out that you happen to think is pretty cool?
Few people come to mind.
Oh, and by the way, the rule is always only one,
Okay, I
because
will.
otherwise
Let me.
we could go on and on forever. But it's meant to be the first name that intuitively pops into your stomach, pops into your brain the moment you think of it.
Yeah, no, okay. Then I would definitely say Brad Victor. Brad Victor, like
And tell
it's
us
the
more.
guy. Yeah, it's as I talked about earlier about dynamic land, and most of my intuitive understanding of McLuhan comes from how he communicates about technology. Um, I really think he has a vision for the future that is genuinely exciting. And I mean that in the most authentic and most hopeful and optimistic way possible. Like, I can be pessimistic, I can be all kinds of negative, or talking about dystopias or how it will probably be hijacked by the wrong people or whatever. I genuinely think what he's envisioning and what they're actually making happen at Dynamic Land is incredibly beautiful,
Cool.
because it's technology that connects rather than disconnects. And I'm dedicating my personal career, or whatever you might call it, to enable that kind of technology further and spread it, because I really, really strongly believe in it. And his presentations have inspired millions in the technology industry, and I really think that he has such beautiful visions, and he can explain it in such an accessible way to Dynamic Land is worth looking up. But all his presentations, all his articles, they're incredible. And
Right on.
yeah.
Very cool. Now, as we play our outro music, where can our listeners, viewers, learn more about you and your work?
I'm still setting up a place where I can share more about my thoughts.
I think the answer then on the interim is MetaViews, because we'd love to have you back.
That would be good.
You know, we've... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a website, which is just Laura.fm, which is...
That's like pretty easy to remember. Laura.fm. And you'll be adding more as your experiments in ideas, theories, and software continue to advance. But we would love to have you back, only because we did an hour. Usually we try to limit this to much less than an hour. And we've still only scratched the surface.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
So if you'd be game, we'd certainly love to hear more of your perspectives on AI, on technology, biology, but to also keep us in the loop as to what's happening in Europe, and in particular Northern Europe, is something that we would be grateful for. So thank you very much. We appreciated your presence here on the show. For those listening, you can find us on all the popular audio podcasting platforms, maybe even some of the unpopular ones, as well as YouTube, and we've got a Substack. We'll be back later in the week. As you know, we are now in our quality phase of MetaViews, and Laura has certainly stepped up and provided us with a quality episode, so thank you very much. And again, we'll be back soon. Stay fresh, stay radical, and keep your eyes open. Thanks again. Take care.